Sampling procedures for mycotoxin determination in food and feed products. A training video. Sponsored by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, FAO, in collaboration with the Italian National Institute of Health, the ISS. This video has been produced by Dr. Carlo Brera and by Dr. Marina Miraglia from the ISS and by Dr. Maya Pinheiro from the FAO. Despite many years of research and the introduction of good practices in the food production, storage, and distribution chains, mycotoxins continue to be a health problem. In developing countries, mycotoxins have profound economic implications. Losses in grain and animal production are also increased by losses of markets, by non-tariff barriers due to mycotoxin level restrictions. Since the discovery of the aflatoxins in the 1960s, regulations have been established in many countries to protect consumers from the harmful effects of mycotoxins that may contaminate foodstuffs, as well as to ensure fair practices in food trade. Sampling plans and sampling methodologies are increasingly being included in these regulations. Various factors play a role in decision-making processes focused on setting limits for mycotoxins. These include knowledge about the level of distribution of mycotoxins in commodities, which is directly related to the sampling methodology. The Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, FAO, has played a major role in providing information and capacity building on prevention and control of mycotoxins, including international conferences and meetings on mycotoxins, workshops, publications, risk assessment of the major mycotoxins and multiple field projects to assist countries in mycotoxin prevention and control. The design of sampling procedures for mycotoxins has been an international concern for many years. FAO Food and Nutrition Paper 55, Sampling Plans for Aflatoxin Analysis in Peanuts and Corn, 1993. Codex Alimentarius Commission, an intergovernmental body created by FAO and WHO in 1963 in order to implement the joint FAO-WHO Food Standards Program, has established a harmonized maximum level and sampling plan for aflatoxin in peanuts, Codex Standard 209, and Guidelines on Sampling, General GL 50. The Italian National Institute of Health, ISS, is the leading technical and scientific public body of the Italian National Health Service. Its activities include research, control, training, and consultation in the interest of public health protection. The present video demonstrates key sampling methodologies for mycotoxins based on the international guidelines of the Codex Alimentarius and other mandatory requirements. The aim of this training video is to illustrate theory and technical procedures of sampling for the evaluation of mycotoxins in food and feed. The dissemination of this video will improve the skill of operators, in particular in developing countries, involved in the sampling procedures, thus contributing to reduce the impact of wrongly estimating mycotoxin contamination on health and trade. The film of the video includes both a general and a practical part. The general part provides first of all some basic information on mycotoxins. Then information on sampling is given, including basic principles, the type of sampling procedures and points where sampling is usually performed. In addition, information is given on sample preparation, including the basic principles and a brief overview of the main types of sample preparation. In the practical part section, demonstration of sampling procedures at different sampling sites and with different equipment is initially given, followed by the demonstration of the most common laboratory sample preparation procedures. Overview on mycotoxins. Microscopic filamentous fungi can develop on a wide variety of food commodities and under suitable environmental conditions can lead to the production of highly toxic chemical substances, commonly known as mycotoxins. has been calculated that approximately 25% of the crops worldwide are contaminated by mycotoxins. Mycotoxin production can occur at a pre-harvest level as well as after the harvest if good storage practices are not followed. Many factors favor mold infestation, the main being adverse weather conditions, such as dryness or humidity, insect attacks, and mechanical damage of the kernel. However, the presence of molds does not necessarily imply mycotoxin contamination, or vice versa. Mycotoxin residues can contaminate crops even if the molds were removed. Furthermore, mycotoxins in food and feed are normally not destroyed or reduced by heating or processing, although some technological procedures like roasting of coffee or cereal milling do so. Mycotoxins mainly exert a chronic action on the long term, but outbreaks of acute intoxication also followed by death have occurred. The most relevant toxic actions on humans attributable to mycotoxins are genotoxicity for aflatoxins, carcinogenicity for aflatoxins, ochratoxin A, and fumonisins. Other toxic effects of mycotoxins include hepatotoxic, gastrointestinal, hematopoietic, and nephrotoxic effects, as well as immunotoxicity, teratogenicity, and mutagenicity, depending on the toxin and on the dose. Animals are often affected by mycotoxosis due to the presence of mycotoxins in feed and forage, therefore heavily impairing their productivity. Due to the toxic effect of mycotoxins, up to date, 99 countries have established regulatory limits for mycotoxins in food and feed. However, due to differences in risk policies and in the perception of acceptable risks for health, a wide spectrum of tolerance levels are in force worldwide. As an example, the limit for aflatoxins ranges from 0 to 50 micrograms per kilogram. Sampling. Worldwide legislation on sampling basically consists of in Codex, EU, ISO, are some of the most significant sampling guidelines and regulations. To ascertain the content of mycotoxins in food and feed is very relevant for a large number of reasons. The protection of the health of the population, the improvement of the productivity of animals and the protection of their welfare, the implementation of control activities for verifying the compliance to maximum accepted limits, the free flow of trade and of export activities. The need is to obtain a representative sample. A wrong sampling plan, in fact, can greatly affect the reliability of measured levels of mycotoxins, resulting even in legal disputes and barriers to trade. The analytical chain. A statistical variance and the total variability consists of the sum of sampling, sample preparation, and analytical variances. Definitions. A lot is an identifiable quantity of a food commodity delivered at one time and determined by the official to have common characteristics, such as origin, variety, type of packaging, packer, consignor, or markings. Sublot. Designated part of a large lot in order to apply the sampling method on that designated part. Each sublot must be physically separate and identifiable. Incremental sample. A quantity of material taken from a single random place in the lot or sublot. Aggregate sample. The combined total of all the incremental samples taken from the lot or sublot. The sampling step consists of selecting an aggregate sample of a given size from a bulk lot by combinations of a variable number of incremental samples. Sampling variance can be very large since the distribution among some mycotoxins, like aflatoxins, in contaminated kernels in a lot is typically skewed. As a consequence, the smaller the sample size, the higher the variance associated to the sampling step. The sample preparation step is a three-step process that includes grinding or slurring the whole sample, homogenizing the ground test portion, and drawing the test aliquot from the homogenized test portion of the comminuted sample. Sample preparation variance is associated to the number per unit mass obtained from the comminution of the aggregate sample. Comminution strongly depends on the type of milling equipment. The sample preparation variance can be reduced by increasing the size of the test aliquot from which mycotoxin is extracted. and/or increasing the degree of comminution by increasing the number of particles per unit mass. The analytical step consists of several steps where the mycotoxin is solvent extracted from the subsample, the solvent is purified, and the mycotoxin in the solvent is quantified. Analytical variance can be reduced by increasing the number of replicate analyses, using improved quantification technology, and improving the training of laboratory personnel. Sampling. Sources of errors. Low number of incremental samples. Low representativity of sampling points. Wrong aggregate sample size. Sampling theory. The probability that a lot is accepted when the average sample test result is less than or equal to the guideline level is generally described by the operating characteristic curve. If the mycotoxin concentration in a lot exceeds a defined lot guideline, then the lot should be rejected. If the lot concentration is less than or equal to the guideline, then the lot should be accepted. Because of the total variance among sample test results, two types of mistakes are associated with mycotoxin sampling plan. Seller's risk. Some good lots, where toxin concentration is less than or equal to the guideline level, will be rejected. Average sample test result is greater than the guideline level by the sampling. False positive. Consumer's risk. Some bad lots, lots where toxin concentration is greater than the guideline level, will be accepted. Average sample test result is less than or equal to the guideline level by the sampling plan. False negative. Typical sampling points are ship storage, bulk or sacks or packages, containers, heaps, trucks and or trains, warehouses, silos, retail, packages. Types of sampling procedures. Depending on the available facilities at the sampling point, different types of sampling procedures can be applied. Static, by means of probes or scoops or buckets, or dynamic, by the use of automatic or manual samples. The objective of sample preparation is to obtain a representative test aliquot to be analyzed from the aggregate sample. Sample preparation. Sources of errors. Scarce homogeneity of the granulometry of test aliquots. Improper degree of comminution. With the aim to increase the homogeneity of the mycotoxin concentration in the aggregate sample, a slurried sample is obtained by the use of proper homogenizers. In alternative to the slurry formation, a test portion can be ground to a fine particle size, 20 mesh size or 1 mm opening size. The main characteristics of the grinding or slurring procedure are basically the following. To open up contaminated kernels and distribute the particles throughout the sample, thereby increasing the chance of detecting contaminated particles. To increase the uniformity of the commodity and therefore allow the drawing of the test aliquot with greater precision and accuracy. Practical part. The basic equipment to be used for the implementation of sampling procedures is personal protective equipment. For example, hard hats, glasses, masks, gloves, and lab coats. Other equipment necessary for the drawing of samples is probes, scoops, and buckets of various sizes and functionality. In addition, a range of different kinds of scales should be available in order to calculate the weight of the incremental and aggregate samples. A typical mycotoxin sampling scheme to be adapted to specific national and international standards implies the following features: identification of the lot or sublot including their size, calculation of the incremental samples to be collected, collection of the incremental samples, formation of the aggregate sample, identification of the lot or sublot including its size. Depending on the sampling procedure employed, lot and sublot sizes have to be consistently decided. For instance, according to the Codex sampling plan for peanuts, lots equal or bigger than 500 tons have to be divided into 100-ton sublots. The same approach is called for in the European Regulation 401/2006 for cereals and dried figs, pistachios, and other nuts. Both European legislation and Codex standard define a lot as an identifiable quantity of a food commodity delivered at one time and determined by the official to have common characteristics such as origin, variety, type of packaging, packer, consignor, or markings. A sublot is defined as a designated part of a large lot in order to apply the sampling method on that designated part. Each sublot must be physically separate and identifiable. Calculation of the incremental samples to be collected. An incremental sample is defined as a quantity of material taken from a single random place in the lot or sublot. After the identification of a lot or sublot, the number of incremental samples has to be defined. Collection of the incremental samples. As far as possible, incremental samples shall be taken at various places distributed throughout the lot or sublot. The collection of incremental samples can occur in static conditions, drawing samples by probes from heaps. Trucks. Containers. Sacks. And at retail. Whenever possible, samples can be dynamically collected, drawing samples from the flowing commodity at regular intervals of time or during the offloading of trucks or ship storage. An automatic sampling procedure can also be implemented, regulating the diverter at fixed intervals of time, taking into consideration the loading or offloading speed of the flowing commodity and the lot or sublot size. In any case, for each tool used, the weight of the incremental sample must be previously tared. Formation of the aggregate sample. An aggregate sample is defined as the combined total of all the incremental samples taken from the lot or sublot. All the collected incremental samples have to be gathered to form the aggregate sample. Each aggregate sample shall be weighed, thoroughly homogenized, and after recording the weight, placed in a clean, inert container, offering adequate protection from contamination and against damage in transit. All necessary precautions shall be taken to avoid any change in the composition of the sample, which might arise during transportation or storage. Each sample taken for the official use shall be sealed at the place of sampling and identified following the rules in force in each country. A record shall be kept of each sampling, permitting each lot to be identified unambiguously and giving the date and place of sampling together with any additional information likely to be of assistance to the analyst. Sample preparation. Test aliquots for enforcement, trade, defense, and referee purposes will be formed from the homogenized and finely ground aggregate sample either by the formation of a slurry or by dry milling laboratory equipment. A slurried sample is the result of the addition of tap or distilled water, depending on the chlorine content, to the aggregate sample to obtain a homogeneous paste. Typical water commodity ratios are 1:1 for items without shells and 2:1 for commodities with shells. Slurried test aliquots will be drawn from the whole paste and properly sealed and coated for official use. The following steps must be performed. Addition of water to the homogenized sample. Grinding of the sample for 10 to 15 minutes till a homogeneous paste is obtained. The waste sample must be properly handled, duly reporting a written indication of the container content. Washing with water and cleaning of the homogenizer prior to further analysis. For smaller amounts of sample, for instance 1 or 2 kilos, the same slurry procedure can be used by the use of a lab-scale homogenizer. In this case, after the addition of water, stir for 3 minutes at high speed. Alternatively, the aggregate sample can be ground in dry conditions by proper laboratory millers. Taking care to obtain as fine and homogeneous material as possible. In order to achieve a better result, it is possible to pre-grind the sample up to a coarse granulometry and then use a mill able to commute the sample into finer particles. Dry milled test aliquots will be formed after a thorough homogenization by randomly taking increments until the final weight for the analysis is reached. Typical particle size should be 20 mesh or lower. Sampling at the retail stage, even if performed at the end of the food chain, can still represent a noteworthy control activity for increasing the protection of the consumer. Despite this, so far, no statistically developed sampling methodology has been extensively developed, nor have any guidelines been put forward at an international level. European Regulation 401/2006 is therefore the first legislative provision giving a specific sampling procedure at retail in terms of the number of incremental samples and the weight of the aggregate sample. For instance, for lots of pistachios, less than or equal to 0.1 tons, as most likely occurs at the retail stage, the number of packages should be consistent with an aggregate sample of 3 kilos. An incremental sample may or may not be represented by the package, depending on the weight of the package. In case the portion to be sampled is so small that it is impossible to obtain an aggregate sample of due weight, a smaller amount of the aggregate sample might be drawn. Where that is not possible, an alternative method of sampling at the retail stage may be applied, provided that it ensures that the aggregate sample is sufficiently representative of the sampled lot and is fully described and documented. In any case, the aggregate sample should be at least 1 kilo or 0.5 kilos for spices. Sampling at the retail stage is performed at the distribution stage in stores, supermarkets, or open markets, and the product is usually in packages of various sizes. In this case, the lot is represented by packages having the same lot number kept on the shelves or in the warehouses of the distributor. An appropriate number of packages is sampled in order to reach the prescribed weight of the aggregate sample, taking care to select packages having the same lot number. The incremental samples are gathered. And in the case of official control, they're sealed at the place of sampling. And registered. The aggregate sample is successfully brought to the laboratory for testing. Each package incremental sample is taken out and opened. To prepare the test aliquots for analysis, the whole aggregate sample will be dry ground or slurried. In case of dried fruits, the dry grinding or slurry procedures can be carried out by the use of proper laboratory mills, either on unshelled items or after shelling each fruit. The slurried or dried ground test portion, shelled or unshelled, is successively extracted and cleaned up by passing the sample into immunoaffinity columns and then analyzed for quantitative results. Acknowledgements.